There is a warm, amber glow that remains long after the fire of the struggle has gone out. We tell the stories of hope and warmth that survive even the coldest winters of life. Hit subscribe today and keep the glow of great storytelling alive in your heart.
Sign it tonight, or I will make sure this marriage doesn't exist by the end of the week. My mother-in-law didn't raise her voice. She never did. She had the kind of stillness that powerful women develop when they've spent decades not needing to shout. She said it the way you'd say, pass the bread. Casual, inevitable, already decided. I looked down at the document sitting on the dining table between a vase of fresh hydrangeas and a half-finished glass of sparkling water. A postnuptial agreement, 22 pages, spiral-bound, tabbed with little colored stickers at every signature line. Someone had taken real care with the presentation. Someone had wanted me to feel the weight of the thing before I even read a word. My husband, Elliot, was at the far end of the table. He was doing that thing he did when he wanted to disappear from a conversation, turning his phone slowly in his hands, staring at the screen like it held something fascinating, like the table settings weren't on fire. He hadn't warned me. I didn't know, walking into that house tonight, that there would be a document waiting for me next to the flower arrangement. I didn't know his family had hired the firm. I didn't know any of it. That was information I would think about later, in the car, alone. His father, Reginald, was seated to my left. He had the posture of a man who had never second-guessed a single decision in his life, spine straight, hands flat on the table, watching me the way a contractor watches a building he's about to demolish. Efficient, not cruel, just practical. His sister, Isadora, hadn't looked up from her wine. She was working on her second glass, and she had that practiced air of someone who wanted to be seen as above the drama while remaining extremely present for all of it. Her husband, Clifton, was the one who slid the document closer to me. He was a corporate attorney. He mentioned it the way some people mention the weather, often and without prompting. He had done the work on this particular agreement. You could tell by the way he watched me pick it up, the way you watched someone open a gift you wrapped yourself. We want to be fair about this, Clifton said. This isn't about doubt. It's about protecting assets that have been in the Ashmore family for 3 generations. Protecting them from me, I said. Protecting them from me, I said. Protecting them, he repeated, pleasantly. I had been married to Elliot for 2.5 years. I had sat at this table for holiday dinners and Sunday lunches. I had smiled through the comments about my apartment in Cleveland, about the fact that my mother taught middle school, about the fact that I had, in the words of my mother-in-law at our first Christmas, such a practical sense of style. I had smiled through all of it because I loved my husband, and because I had learned, young, that the people who underestimate you are only a problem if you let them know you've noticed. I'm not signing it, I said. The room went still. Elliot finally looked up. My mother-in-law tilted her head very slightly. Noelle, she said, making my name sound like a mild inconvenience. I understand this feels intrusive, but you have to understand what this family has built. What we're asking is simply a safeguard. It protects Elliot as much as it protects the family legacy. It protects him from me, I said again. It protects everyone, Reginald said. You came into this marriage without assets. That's not a criticism, that's a fact. We have an obligation to the next generation of this family to make sure that what was built isn't lost. Without assets. 2 words, perfectly chosen, clinical enough to sound fair, specific enough to land exactly where they intended. I had heard variations of this since the night Elliot introduced me to his parents 18 months before we got married. The way his mother's expression shifted when she learned where I was from. The way his father asked twice, politely, what it was exactly that I did for work, as if the first answer hadn't quite registered. Elliot had told them I ran a small consulting firm. His mother had nodded the way you nod when a child tells you about a dream they had, attentive, benevolent, entirely unconvinced that it matters. They had never asked follow-up questions. That was the thing about the Ashmores. They had a category for me, and categories are self-contained. You don't investigate a category. I want to be clear, I said, setting the document down, that I'm not refusing because I have something to hide. I'm refusing because what you're asking is insulting, and I think you know that. Clifton cleared his throat. We've actually done some research on your company's financials. Filed revenue for Meridian Consulting over the last fiscal year was just under $60,000. We're not here to embarrass you, but context matters. I looked at him for a moment. He had done research. I appreciated that, actually. He had gone to the trouble, he just hadn't gone far enough. Before I respond to that, I said, I'd like everyone to take out their phones and look something up. Nobody moved. Please, I said, it'll take 30 seconds. Search Ashby Group Holdings. Isadora laughed once, short, like she was startled. We're not going to Ashby Group Holdings, I said again. ASHBY, I'll wait. There was a silence that had texture to it, the kind of silence that knows something is coming and can't decide whether to brace. Elliot searched first. He always did. He had a reflex toward information, toward wanting to understand things, that his family had spent years trying to train out of him. I watched him type. I watched him read. I watched the color leave his face. What? He said. Not a question. The sound a person makes when the ground shifts. Reginald picked up his phone. His expression didn't change as he read, but his jaw tightened, by a degree that only someone watching very closely would notice. I was watching very closely. My mother-in-law didn't reach for her phone. She looked at her husband's face instead, and she read it the way long-married people read each other, fluently, without words. Clifton was very still. Ashby Group Holdings was not the name on my business cards. It was not what I called myself at networking events or on my LinkedIn profile, which I had kept deliberately sparse for years. Ashby Group was the parent entity, the company above the company that touched anything publicly visible. I had structured it that way for the same reason that certain buildings have unremarkable lobbies, not to hide, to filter. The last time Ashby Group had appeared in a financial publication, it was in a piece about mid-market healthcare infrastructure investment. The reported valuation at that time was approximately $870 million. That had been 14 months ago. The number was higher now, but I hadn't corrected the record. The Ashmore family's total holdings, the real estate, the investment accounts, the commercial properties in 3 states were worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $280 million. I knew this because 18 months ago, one of my subsidiaries had extended a refinancing line to a property management company they used. The Ashmores didn't know the money had come through me. They knew the name of the fund. They didn't know who sat behind it. "You've been running this since before we got married?" Elliot asked. "I founded the first entity when I was 23, I said. What Clifton found, the $60,000, that's a shell entity I use for administrative purposes. It's not connected to the operating company. This isn't, Reginald started. Real, I offered. I have the documentation with me if that's helpful." I reached into my bag and took out a folder. Not for drama. I had genuinely brought it in case this came up, which it always did when people looked at me and made certain assumptions about what they were looking at. "I want to say something before we go any further," I said, "because I think it matters for what comes next." I looked at my mother-in-law. I never misrepresented myself to this family. Elliot knew I had a company. I told him on our second date that I was building something I intended to grow into something significant. He asked what kind of timeline I was working with. I told him 5 years. He laughed, not meanly, just the way people laugh when they're not sure whether to take something seriously, and changed the subject. I didn't push it. Neither did anyone else. "You deliberately kept this from us," she said. "I didn't hide it. You didn't ask." I looked around the table. There's a difference. The silence sat differently now. Not the silence of people preparing to attack. The silence of people recalibrating. My mother-in-law's expression had moved into something I had never seen on her face before. Not embarrassment. She was too controlled for that. Something more like the expression of someone running new numbers in real time, updating a spreadsheet they'd been confident was complete. I thought about the first dinner I had in this house. Elliot and I had been dating for 4 months. I had worn a dress I actually loved, and I had been excited, genuinely, stupidly excited, because I thought meeting his family might be the beginning of being known. I thought I might walk through those doors and become, to these people, a person. Instead, his mother had spent 20 minutes asking about my family in a way that was technically curiosity and actually an inventory. His father had asked what part of Cleveland I was from, with a specific inflection that turned a question into an assessment. Isadora had told me, smiling, that she loved my earrings, in a tone that said she did not love my earrings. After dinner, while Elliot was in the study with his father, his mother had taken me out onto the back porch on the pretext of showing me the garden renovation. It was October. There was no garden to see. She had stood beside me looking at the dark lawn and said quietly, that she wanted me to understand something about Elliot, that he was generous by nature, that he loved easily, that those were qualities she had always treasured in him and also worried about. "I'm telling you this," she had said, "because I believe in directness. This family has built something over a long time. We are very protective of it. Whatever you're hoping for from this relationship, I want you to understand that we pay attention. We always pay attention." I had said, "I understand." I had not said, "So do I." I had driven home that night and sat in the parking lot of my apartment building for a long time. I had called my mother, who answered immediately because she always did, and I had told her what happened, and she had said, in the matter-of-fact way she said most things, "Baby, people who talk about what they're paying attention to are usually paying attention to the wrong things." She was right. She usually was. I came back to the table, to Elliot's face, which was doing something complicated and private that I recognized as the expression of a man realizing he had been handed a story about his own wife by people who didn't know her, and had accepted it without checking the source. "There's one more thing," I said. I opened the folder. 14 months ago, the Ashmore family took out a credit facility through a fund called Carver Bridge Capital to refinance the commercial properties on Lakeview and Harmon. I looked at Reginald. "That facility is currently in technical default. The balloon payment that came due in November was missed by 31 days. Reginald's expression didn't change, but his hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. "Carver Bridge Capital," I said, "was acquired by an Ashby Group subsidiary in August of last year. I hold the note on that credit facility." I slid a single document across the table. Elliot picked it up before his father could. "I am not calling the note," I said. "I want to be very clear about that. I have no interest in the Ashmore properties. I have no interest in anything that belongs to this family. What I have is documentation, and what I want is for everyone here to understand what the actual picture looks like before we continue." Isadora set her wine glass down. "This is," she started. "A conflict of interest?" I said. "Yes. Clifton, you'll want to flag that in your records." Clifton said nothing. He was staring at the folder in a way that suggested he was thinking about several things at once, and none of them were comfortable. I had not done any of this strategically. I want to be honest about that, because if I'm being accurate, I have to include the parts that aren't clean. I had known about the Carver Bridge situation for months. I had not called the note. I had not used it as leverage. I had not engineered this dinner or timed any of this, but I had brought the folder. I had brought it because when you spent 2 years watching people make decisions about who you are without asking you a single question, at some point you stop waiting to be asked. At some point you bring the folder. "Did you know about the postnuptial agreement?" I asked Elliot, not to humiliate him, because I needed to know. He didn't answer right away. "Elliot, they told me it was routine," he said. "They said it was something they'd asked all the spouses in the family to sign. That it was a formality," I said. He looked down. I had spent 2.5 years watching the Ashmores work on my husband the way weather works on a shoreline, gradually, imperceptibly, reshaping things without ever announcing an intention to. He had not become a different person, but he had become a quieter version of the person he was when I met him, a more managed version. The man I had fallen in love with at a rooftop fundraiser in Chicago had spilled a drink on his own shirt and laughed so hard he snorted, and I had thought, that person is not performing anything. That person was real. I still believed that version was in there. I just didn't know if he believed it anymore. "I want to tell you something," I said to the table, because it felt important to say it clearly to all of them, rather than let it sit unspoken. "I don't have anger about tonight. I want to be honest. I have something, but I don't think it's anger. It's closer to grief. Because I walked into this family wanting to be part of it. I actually wanted that. I thought if I was patient enough, if I just kept showing up, eventually there would be a version of this where I was a person to you and not a problem to be managed." "No one has treated you as," my mother-in-law started. "You printed 22 pages," I said, "tabbed and stickered. You put it on the table before I sat down, and you did it because you have spent 2.5 years deciding you already knew what I was." She was quiet. "I don't hate you for it," I said. "I understand it. You built something and you're afraid of losing it. That's human. I just need you to understand that the thing you were afraid of losing to the girl from Cleveland with the small consulting firm, she was never the real picture." Reginald said tightly, You've made your point. I haven't, actually, I said. The point is this: I never hid from you. You never looked. And those are two completely different things. The next time you sit across from someone and decide you already know the story, ask one more question first. It costs nothing, and it might save you from drafting 22 pages of the wrong document. I closed the folder. I looked at Elliot. I'm going to the Meridian Inn tonight, I said. I need some air and I need to think. That's not a dramatic exit. I just can't sit at this table any longer and pretend the last hour didn't happen. I picked up my bag. But I want you to know something, I said to him specifically, quietly, so it was just between us and not for the audience of his family. I'm not done. I'm not walking out on us. I am walking out of this room tonight because I need to. There is a difference, and I need you to know I know the difference. He looked at me for a long time. Something looped across his face. Not quite the look I wanted, but closer to it than anything I'd seen from him all night. The look of someone waking up from something. Okay, he said quietly. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nothing. I buttoned my coat, said goodnight to no one in particular, walked out through the foyer with its mahogany staircase and its gallery of Ashmore family portraits going back to the 1940s. All those faces watching me leave, certain of their permanence. Outside, the air was cold and clear, the kind of cold that sharpens everything. My car was at the end of the driveway. I had parked facing out. I always parked facing out. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes before starting the engine. My phone had 3 notifications from my operations director. A deal in the Louisville portfolio had closed early. The team had celebrated. Someone had brought a cake from the bakery on 5th and sent a photo. 41 people in that photo. 41 people whose jobs existed because of something I had started in a studio apartment at 23 with a laptop and a conviction that I was seeing something other people weren't seeing yet. I texted back, "Wonderful. Tell everyone I'll be in Thursday. And please order lunch for the whole floor on me." Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me," she said. She always said that. Not hello. Not how are you. Just, tell me. Like she already knew there was something to hear. So I told her. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her great gifts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Did you handle it?" "I think so. Did you say anything you regret?" I thought about it, honestly. "No." "Then you did fine." "I don't know if Elliot and I are okay," I said. "You don't know that tonight," she said. "That's a different question, and it doesn't get answered in a driveway." She was right. She always was. I started the car, pulled out slowly onto the private road that wound through the Ashmore property, past the stone walls and the manicured hedgerows, and the gatehouse with the light on. In my rearview mirror, the house sat enormous and illuminated against the dark sky, every window lit like it was performing certainty. I had spent 2.5 years feeling like an outsider looking at those lights. That night, for the first time, I understood that I had never needed to be inside. The thing they had been trying to protect themselves from was never a threat. It was a mirror. And the only reason it terrified them was that for 2.5 years, they had refused to look. I put the car in drive. The road ahead was dark and quiet and mine. I've thought about that night a lot since it happened. Not obsessively. I'm not built for obsession. But the way you return to something that clarified things for you, the way you revisit a moment that showed you who you actually were, as opposed to who you'd been pretending to be comfortable as. The thing I keep coming back to isn't the folder. It isn't the look on Reginald's face when the numbers stopped adding up in his favor, or the way Clifton went very still when I said his name and the word SEC in the same sentence. Those moments were real, and I won't pretend they didn't land the way I needed them to land. But that's not the part that stayed with me. What stayed with me was the drive home. Sitting in that parking lot outside the Meridian Inn with my phone in my lap and my mother's voice in my ear saying, "Did you say anything you regret?" And realizing the answer was no, not because I was perfect. Because I had spent 2.5 years making a quiet, daily decision not to become the person they thought I was. And that night, all those small decisions stacked up into something that held. That's the thing nobody tells you about integrity when you're young. It doesn't feel like a grand gesture while you're doing it. It feels like keeping your mouth shut at Christmas dinner when his mother says your background with that particular inflection. It feels like going back inside after sitting in the car for 10 minutes. It feels like building something real, quietly, without needing anyone at that table to validate that it's real. Reginald built his family's fortune by protecting it. I understand that impulse. What he didn't understand, what none of them understood, is that protection only works when you've correctly identified the threat. They spent 2.5 years protecting themselves from the wrong thing. The cost of that mistake wasn't paid by me. It was paid by them at their own dinner table in front of their own family. That's not revenge. That's just cause and effect. You treat someone like a category for long enough, you stop seeing them clearly. And when you stop seeing clearly, you make bad decisions. You draft 22 pages of the wrong document, you miss the note on your own credit line. You let your son's marriage erode because it was more comfortable to manage him than to know his wife. I think about Elliot a lot too. I think about the man I watched in that lobby in Chicago. The one who laughed at himself without embarrassment, who wasn't performing anything. That man existed. He got quieter under the weight of his family's expectations, but he didn't disappear. The fact that he looked at me the way he did at the end of that dinner, that specific look, the one that meant something was cracking open, told me the excavation was possible. Whether he did it was his work to do, not mine. What I know is this: I didn't walk out of that house because I won. I walked out because I was finished waiting to be seen by people who had decided in advance not to look. There's a kind of freedom in that realization that I didn't expect. It's not triumphant, it's just clean. Like finishing something you've been carrying a long time and setting it down somewhere permanent. The road ahead was dark and mine. That was enough.